Okay. So we finally get ready to start another commitment, but a little review first, as we always do. It's funny. Somebody who has not been to any of these studies, but has watched all of them online or most of them online. Actually, yesterday I said something, and he was like, "The definition of marriage is." Yeah, I was like, "Wow, I'm impressed." So the question is, do any of you remember the definition of marriage that we're using for this study?
Companionship.
He's got one word. All right. We have two more words.
In your old notes.
Aha.
Covenant.
Okay. So,
Covenant of companionship.
covenant of companionship, based off of Genesis 2. God made man and said, he's lonely. He needs a companion, someone to spend his time with, to share his life with, to make decisions with. And he created Eve, who was fit for Adam. She was the same and opposite of Adam. So, Genesis 2, definition of marriage, covenant of companionship. And I keep hammering that, honestly, because every time I study anything about marriage or watch people's marriages, I realize the vast majority of the world doesn't understand what marriage is. It's been clouded and confused and messed up. And it is, I made a covenant with her to be her lifelong companion in every way possible. No one part takes precedent. It's all companionship. So um, just keep hammering that. Last time we looked, what is readily given, easily broken, and costly to restore? Trust. All right. Trust. You meet somebody, and for most people, I mean, I understand there are some people that have been burned so many times they don't, but you meet somebody. I mean, I met Heather in college, and pretty quick. Well, I'm pretty quick to just blurt out all kinds of things, but pretty quick, I'm trusting her with all kinds of information. I'm telling her all kinds of things, and I'm building trust. She was a little more hesitant, a little smarter than I was. Took her a little more time, but she offered that trust. We built that trust, and then if one of us should do something, it's easy to break trust and to destroy it. Last time, looking at Ephesians chapter 4 and 29, verse 29, spiritual armor. Nope. That's Ephesians 6. That's the next question. Communication. Ephesians 4:29. What? TWO. What two things does Paul require for good communication? There were two parts of it. And most of our independent biblical teaching has focused on half of the verse and forgot the second half of the verse. Or that's how I grew up with a lot
of it.
Edification. Okay. Edification. Build up. Don't tear down, always build up. Those are the two parts of his communication. We see a lot, we grow up a lot trying to teach children not to use bad language or, call their brother stupid or things like that. And so we hammer the don't use destructive communication. But equally as important is the command to always be building up, to be proactive, building each other back up. Don't tear down, always build up. And then Ephesians 6:14, again from last time. What is the first part of the spiritual armor that Paul mentions? Belt of truth. Always the spiritual armor begins with truth. The belt of the Roman army, of the Roman armor, the lower parts of the armor hung from it. The upper parts of the armor rested on it. The sword hung from it. Everything worked off of that belt. And if there is not honesty in our marriage, as well as our daily life, but specifically in this study, we're talking about our marriage. If there is not truth and honesty in what we say and how we live our lives, we're going to destroy that trust and be in a horrible mess. So, the commitments we have looked at already. First commitment, we will give ourselves to a regular lifestyle of confession and forgiveness. Number 2, we will make growth and change our daily agenda. Commitment number 3, we will work together to build a sturdy bond of trust. These are the 3 we've looked at so far. All of these things, you pay attention and you start realizing none of these things are a one-time deal. None of these things are a do it once and you're done. This is the life we will live together, committing to each other to live this way. Number 4, which is what we get to tonight, is we will commit to building a relationship of love. Now, as I was reading this and I was preparing for this one, I was like, I kind of would have started here on this study if I was the guy writing the book. But, the internationally acclaimed Christian author who, has written zillions of books on family and marriage, he seemed to think to do it otherwise. So he did it different. I still don't really understand why. But some of the introductory stuff before we got to the commitments actually touched on some of this. But we get into it a little deeper tonight. But as we look at it, we're going to dive in. It's interesting. He pulls out, he picks an interesting passage to work with, and I appreciated it. We're going to get there in a minute, but I have an introductory, just kind of thought question. All right. What did John, Paul, George, and Ringo tell us was the only thing we needed? Love. Love is all you need. Anyhow, I can't sing it, but they said love is all you need. Now, were they right? And why?
I think yes, because if you love someone the right way, you're going to do whatever's best for them.
Aha! So she says, if you love someone the right way, you're going to do what's best for them. So, is she right? Yes. Were the Beatles right? No. Because I can guarantee you that's not the love they had in mind. When they said love is all you need, they had the humanistic, carnal version of love in mind. The warm, fuzzy feelings, the physical attraction, that's the kind of love they were talking about. But if you remember, when the Pharisees come to Jesus and they say, what is the greatest commandment? Jesus himself boiled it down to love your neighbor as yourself. And we did that a couple weeks ago, and it's like, how can that be possible why did Jesus skip over love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind? Because Jesus knew that in order to love your neighbor as yourself, you were going to have to love God that way. So he had already established that and was jumping to the second one. True biblical love, if done right, it actually does encompass all of these other commitments that we've already been talking about and that we will talk about. Because in a different study we're doing, in a different study, I think. I have 3 studies running in my head right now, and I'm combining them sometimes. Sin is selfish all the time. Maybe it is this study. Anyhow, sin is always selfish. Sin is always thinking about me. Love is always looking for what's best for them. So, Oh, okay. And for the next question, I've danced on it. Heather mentioned part of it. What is the, do you remember the definition of love that you have heard me use before? And if I don't get great answers, it just means I'm free to repeat it multiple times as I preach in the future because people aren't tired of it yet. Anybody remember the definition I use? All right. Love is choosing what is best for the person loved, not what is easiest for me. And when I say choosing, I mean choosing and acting on it, not just making the choice and then not doing anything, but doing what is best for the person loved, not what is easiest or even most enjoyable for me. That is true biblical love. Now, the interesting thing when we talk about a definition of love, okay, Jeff gives you that, but where do you see a definition of love in the Bible? Most of us, our minds would go to 1 Corinthians 13. Love is this, love is that, love is that. Okay, but there's another one, which is where we're going to go tonight. 1 John 4. 1 John 4. Turn there. The less well-known love chapter. It's easy to miss. John, 1 John. All right, 1 John 4. I'm going to start in verses, I'm going to start with reading verse 7 and 8. All right? Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. And whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. So, easiest question of the night, what does John want us to do?
Know God's love.
Know God's love.
Love one another.
Love one another. What does John want us to do? He wants us to love. Now, what does John say is the source of love?
God.
God is. God is the source of love. True love, we would not understand it if not for God. We would have no reference for it if not for God. God is the source of love. Now, verse 8 makes a rather bold and possibly scary claim. What is that claim? In verse 8.
You're not saved if you don't love others.
To claim to be a Christian and not love others, John says, you can't do that. You can't truly love God and not love other people. You can't truly know God and not love other people. It seems like one of those harsh, broad statements that in our own minds we're tempted to try and qualify and adjust. What he really meant was, no, I'm pretty sure John said what he meant. And the Holy Spirit directed him to say it that way. And he said, anyone who does not love does not know God. Those are pretty harsh words, but they're there. And so it gives us, now again, it's not a prescriptive. It's not a, if you want to be saved, go out and love people. That's not what he's saying. He's saying if you're already saved, you will love people. It is an evidence. It is a descriptive verse, not a prescriptive verse. Okay? So, let's keep moving. And if it feels like I'm moving really fast through the questions, that's because we have pages and pages of other stuff to get to, too. So, we're trying to keep this somewhat reasonable tonight. All right. Okay. Did Jesus ever make a claim like that? Not in these exact words, but was there ever a time when Jesus said something that could have been used the same way? Think about that for just a second. I should have saved a piece of pizza to chew on. See, when there's only 4 people here, you all have to work harder because you can't, bank on anybody else.
It's too late in the day.
Oh, gonna go too late in the day. Yeah, people have had a long, hard day. All right, John. Okay, I'll give you the chapter and see if it jumps to mind. John chapter 13.
What was the question?
It's been a long, hard day. Okay. Did Jesus ever make a claim like what John is saying in John?
He did. I don't remember what it is.
Okay. Yes, he did. You're right. John 13:35. John 13:35. This is a little less direct, but he makes a fascinating statement that many Christians, churches, have forgotten. John 13:35. By this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. If we claim to be a disciple of Jesus and we don't have love for one another, Jesus says, that doesn't really work. That's not, his view, if you're my disciple, you will have love toward one another. Now, I understand normally we apply this in a church context. We apply it, interpersonal relationships. But it can be in anything. Specifically with this study, we're looking at our marriage. And I have encountered some marriages through the years where if you told the person, you must love your spouse, can't do it. It's impossible. I won't do it. And it's like, that's a scary statement.
Yeah.
That's a scary statement because that says some things. Now, I understand. In an emotional moment, we can all end up at that point. As far as I understand, if I should ever take the tail of the philodendron and tuck it back into the pot, will be her emotional response at the moment. And I have learned better. I won't ever do that ever again. So I can understand in an emotional moment. But when we stop and consider the love of God and what God has forgiven us from, we can't look at our spouse and say, I just can't love that. I can't love that. Tough one to consider, but John said it. Interesting. I love the fact, weird little connections make me excited, okay? John writes and records these words from Jesus. Then he gets down to writing his own book later, and he comes up with something very similar to it. And it's like you can, I don't know, to me, imagination running wild. John's writing and thinking, yeah, I remember Jesus talking about that one.
Stuck with him.
Stuck with him. Okay? If you don't love, you don't know God. So, all right, now we go back to 1 John. I wanted to get that cross-reference in there. All right. 1 John chapter 4. Now we'll do verse 9 through 11. All right. In this, the love of God was made manifest among us, that God sent his only Son into the world so that we might live through him. In this is love, not that we have loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. John here, he's told us Christians are going to have to love. And then he says, all right, let me give you a definition. Let me give you an example. How did God show his love for us? John says.
Sent his only son.
He sent his only son. That made manifest word, different translations do it different way. The idea is, how did God make it clear to us? How did God make love obvious to us? He sent his only son into the world. This is how God showed us. This is the example God gave us of love. All right. What did God send his son to be for us?
Propitiation.
Propitiation. Do we know the definition or the understanding of the word propitiation?
Savior of the world.
Okay, he is the Savior of the world. Yes.
Appeasement of God's wrath.
Appeasement of God's wrath. The word propitiation itself comes back to the definition of it is appeasing wrath, paying for wrath. In our context, it's always appeasement of God's wrath. But propitiation, the core definition is paying a wrath debt. There is a debt of anger that is owed, of wrath. Somebody had to pay it. Jesus paid it. He was our payment. He became our payment. So that is how he showed it. All right. Well, that is what Jesus did when he was sent. All right. Now, question. Did Jesus die out of compulsion or willingly? Because, and the reason I bring that up, if you look at verse 10, notice how he says that, but that he loved us and sent his son to be the propitiation. So does that mean Jesus didn't have a choice? God said, son, go. And he went, oh, Dad, I don't want to do that. But he did it anyhow. Or did Jesus go willingly? Willingly. All right. Did I put the cross reference in? Okay, I already gave you the. I gave away the answer. I put it in smaller font, didn't I? I tried to make it little, didn't I? Just a little bit.
John.
Yeah. Cross reference. John 10. John 10, verse 18. Again, back to the gospel that John recorded. John chapter 10, verse 18. And I just lost my first John. Ready? All right. Jesus here talking, he says, no one takes his life. No one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down. I have authority to take it up again. This charge I received from my Father. He was given the authority over his own life, and he chose of his own will to lay down his life. This was not something that God forced him to do. And I don't know that it's something we would think, well, yeah, God forced him to do, but I think we want to see the context that, no, really, Jesus, this is not just about God the Father's love. This is about Jesus' love too, when we get the two together. All right. All right, back to verse 11 of John chapter 4. What conditional statement does John make in verse 11? It's not super clear, but it's there.
Since God loved us,
Okay.
we have to love one another.
We have to love. Okay. If God loved us, we should love each other the same way. That's it's a, I think there's a correct term for it. In an Excel spreadsheet, you call it an if-then statement, but that's not what we're talking about here. Because God loved us, we must love the same way. Which is where now that we get that and we put that all together, we realize all of this love that John's been talking about is not the kind of love that our world understands. We can't just say, well, God loved me sacrificially, but I don't have to be quite that extreme in it. I mean, God showed me love, and so I can have warm, fuzzy feelings towards Heather, and as long as she makes me happy and looks right and does my laundry the right way, then I will enjoy her and love her. Because at that point, what I'm actually loving is me. As long as she makes me happy, I love her. No, I don't love her. I love myself. And the one chapter of this book, and again, I'm not going through every chapter in detail with the studies, but the one chapter of this book, he goes through all of these different versions of fake love, all the way down to so many Christian couples. Well, we are just so spiritually compatible. And what it really comes down to is we have the exact same belief system, which means being with her is easy, and I don't have to sacrifice anything or discuss anything or worry about anything. I still just love myself, and it's easy for me to be with her. True biblical love. Now, obviously, if the person you're looking at is unsaved, you've got some problems and you have some other biblical commands. But just because the one illustration he was using was a Midwest guy married they didn't call him this, basically married a native Hawaiian hippie. Okay? You can't get any more different culturally. Okay? But if he truly loves her and she truly loves him, they're both willing to sacrifice and make a life together that represents both of them, not just him or her. For Heather and I, it's actually, in studying this, I finally think I may start to understand a comment someone made about us once, years ago. We'd been married for a while. We went through, as part of our mission board training, we went through some marriage counseling stuff. And the guy just, he couldn't figure out how to explain it, but he's like, you guys are just too compatible. And I'm like, sure, man, I'll regret that later. I promise. I was like, what's wrong with that? But in looking at this, maybe that's what he was trying to say. It's easy for us to love each other. It can easily be me loving me just because, well, she's easy to love. She takes care of me. She looks nice. She does all these things. We agree, our upbringings are very similar. We don't have any hard things to work through. And so there were very few opportunities for either one of us to show great sacrifice in our love. Now, it may not at all be what he's talking about, but finally, for the first time in like 30 years, 24 years, I think I may have come up with a way to explain what he was saying. But anyhow, so we should love each other the same way God loves. Yes, I knew there was a reason I was there. Okay. God loved us sacrificially. He loved his enemies. We must love our spouses. And honestly, folks, loving your spouse ought to be the easiest person to love. Although, when marriages get in trouble, it actually becomes very hard. Because the person you're closest to, you see the worst possible of them. You know, I see you guys every once in a while. I see her all the time. I see her at her worst. You see, because all I'm trying to say is that we see each other at our worst and at our best. So to love your spouse the way God says to love is very difficult. Okay? All I'm trying to say. All right. That was the conditional statement. All right. 1 John 4, 12 to 15. Picking up at verse 12. No one has ever seen God. If we love one another, God abides in us, and his love is perfected in us. By this we know that we abide in him and he in us, because he has given us of his Spirit. I'm supposed to be reading
All the way to 15.
all the way to 15. Okay, all right, I got it. All right. And we have seen and testified that the Father has sent his Son to be the Savior of the world. Whoever confesses that Jesus is the Son of God, God abides in him, and he in God. All right. What is the... back into the right place. Okay. What is the proof? This is kind of continuing on some of the same stuff, but it's reinforcing. What is the proof that God abides in us?
His love perfected.
His love perfected in us. Meaning we're able to love others. Because in our own nature, we're just going to be selfish. And without God truly working in us, we're not going to be able to love people the way we ought. Oh, and I guess I kind of answered the next question. What will be perfected or completed when God abides in us? Our love for other people. And I point that out simply because it's not a matter of, you can read that verse and say, oh, God's love becomes perfect when it's, no. My love becomes perfect when God abides in me. It's not a matter of God's love getting better or becoming complete. It's a matter of me being completed and my love becoming complete when God abides in me. Okay. All humans have some capacity for some form of love. But when God abides in us, that love is completed, perfected. We are able to love the way we ought. Okay? We're able to love others. All right. Oh, yes, because he says that in verse 15. 15? Is that it? Yes. No, that statement is... Okay, verse 12. All right, verse 12. No one has ever seen God. Okay? If we can't see God with our eyes, how can we see that God is in us?
Our actions.
Our actions. How we treat other people.
If we're able to love others.
If
the right
our ability to love others the right way. Our ability to love sacrificially is evidence of God living in us, God abiding with us. And again, anybody can pull off a form of sacrificial love for an event here or a something there or a something like that. But to abide and live that way is a different deal. There's all kinds of stories of people that I'm sure, there are soldiers who are unsaved and they make sacrificial decisions and they do things. But for someone to live a continuous lifestyle of putting others first and loving others, that takes God abiding in them and perfecting that love. The more you love God, the more you can love people. Which, again, if you go to the very back page, not the very back, well, oh no. Uh-oh, is it in your handout? Let me see your handout, Heather. Nope, next page. Okay, I put it in there. All right.
There we go.
Yes,
Oh.
I have the little chart in yours. I did not put it in my teacher's notes. I forgot to put that in there.
Teacher's manual.
Yeah, the teacher's manual is flawed. So is the teacher. So that's the story. Again, you hopefully remember this from before. And it's been one of the principles of this whole study. And that is, if you need to love your spouse more, you need to love God more. Because as we love God more and as we both draw closer to God, we draw closer to each other. You cannot fix a Christian marriage on a horizontal level. Horizontal level, you have to fix it on a vertical level. That's the two terms. Vertical level first, and the horizontal level becomes okay. You've got to fix the relationship with God first. So, All of that, though, we go through all of that, and we have all those definitions. And did I miss one? Oh, see. You know that whole thing about a helper that completes you? Yeah, it's good. We have one more. 1 John 4, 19 through 20. Jumping on down in 1 John. Don't want to skip this point. All right. 19 and 20. We love because he first loved us. If anyone says, I love God and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. And it's just John hitting us one more time with we can't go through our lives refusing to love and claiming to be Christians. Now, I will say most of the world doesn't understand Christian love. And there are things that we do that truly are loving that they call judgmental and harsh and terrible, and they don't think it is love. But when you understand what Jesus did and what you're trying to do for them, it is love. And that's back to some of the early lessons, some of the early studies with this. You have made a covenant of companionship with another sinner. Your primary goal is to build them up into a better Christian, to draw them closer to God. And that's why we had the commitment about confession and, confronting and confession, because I have to help her get closer to God. And I'm going to see sin in her that nobody else is going to see. And so I'm going to have to say, well, I see this, and I've got to try and help. If I refuse to do that, I'm not loving. I'm not loving the way God tells us to love. Okay? So, we just can't say we love God and don't love others. And that especially applies to our spouses. Now, we have the definition of love. We understand to truly love our spouse, we must do what is best for them, not necessarily what is easiest, most comfortable, most enjoyable for me. Okay? But on a practical day-to-day level, what does that look like? I mean, I could just give you that and say, all right, guys, go apply it yourselves. Figure out how that works. But the author, not me, has this list of 22 practical applications of sacrificial love in marriage. These aren't questions. These are some statements that he put together. I have some comments about them. At any point in these, if you go, oh, hey, what about such and such? Chime in. This is more of an open, I'm not necessarily asking questions, but if you see something that is helpful or you have a question, say so. First practical application of sacrificial love in marriage. Love is being willing to have your life complicated by the needs and struggles of your husband or wife without impatience or anger. And that goes from physical needs to spiritual needs. You married a sinner. We talked about that. And they're going to have spiritual struggles. What is best for them is to help them even when it makes things harder on you. And that's tough sometimes. On the spiritual realm, it's tough. On the physical realm, it gets even tougher sometimes. I say even tougher. I don't know. I've watched people, I would say most of us in here had some fairly traditional wedding vows, and the whole in sickness and in health. And most of us kind of say that, and in the back of our heads, we're thinking, let's just stick with the health part. Let's not do the sickness part, okay? But somebody that, I don't know, friend of a friend, some connection we have. I still don't understand the connection. Anyhow, They went on Christmas vacation. The wife was happy, healthy, doing fine. Weird set of medical circumstances. She now has no legs, no arms, and massive medical problems. Her husband went from having a perfectly healthy wife that can help take care of him
And their 2 kids.
to now an invalid that he has to take care of, and she can't even like talk mostly or something. There's something.
She's on a ventilator.
She's on a ventilator and stuff. I mean, it's just crazy. And to truly love. Now, I think he's going to have moments of frustration. I don't know how you don't. I don't know how she doesn't. But he's going to have to live a life of, I'm not going to be irritated with her. I am going to choose to love and take care of her. Difficult one. All right. That is a practical application of what we're talking about. Love is actively fighting the temptation to be critical and judgmental towards your spouse while looking for ways to encourage and praise. It's, again, you're going to see your spouse at the worst possible times. And we can be critical and judgmental, or we can look for ways to help. Temptations come, but you can choose to encourage instead of tear down. Now, again, we're still going to have to say you're wrong if the Bible says they're wrong. Okay, just because they want Miracle Whip instead of mayonnaise, you don't have to tell them they're wrong. You can let them figure that out for themselves someday. But anyhow, it's we don't tear down, we build up. All right, love is the daily commitment to resist. Oh, I like this one. Resist the needless moments of conflict that come from pointing out and responding to minor offenses. There's some things just didn't need to be said. Okay? So she, I don't know, folded my underwear the wrong way. Don't think it really mattered. It's not a big deal. Okay? I don't know. Maybe it was to you, but, so there's the minor things. We think about it sometimes, and we joke sometimes. The other day, it's probably terrible. We have a grim sense of humor and probably bordering on mocking sometimes. The other day, I think I asked her, she asked me to carry something downstairs, and I was like, I ain't doing that. And she's like, oh, I'm hurt. And I'm like, I fall on my knees. Would you consider forgiving me for my egregious sin? We get a little carried away. There may be a little drama that happens in our house from time to time. Okay. Yes, there is no doubt. The apple didn't fall far from the tree on that. Those are, honestly, that was a joking matter. We goofed off. But the little things. Okay, so she didn't put the socks on this part of the drawer, so he left his socks on the floor. There's things that are honestly small things, and they don't have to be dealt with. But I will say, you have to actually set it aside and not dwell on it. There's a difference between setting it aside and banking it for future use. Okay? Banking all of the offenses and just waiting till they build up to something big, that doesn't count. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, no, actually, I'm going to set that aside and I'm going to let that go and I'm not going to care about it. But we have to make that choice to not care. All right. Love is being lovingly honest and humbly approachable in times of misunderstanding, and being more committed to unity and love than you are to winning, accusing, or being right. If you're ever in the middle of a moment and the feeling that's cropping up is, I'm losing the argument, you have a problem. Because if the point is to win the argument, you're in the wrong place. The point should be unity and coming to an understanding of what's really going on. not winning the argument. Anytime, and different people are more or less competitive in things like that. Some people, they're just so competitive that, the wall is gray. No, it's navy gray. No, it's haze gray. No, it's institutional gray. I mean, some people are just so competitive they have to win. Yeah. If that's the perspective, you need to be more concerned about the unity of the relationship than winning. Okay? These are just because you're going to sacrifice your right to be right for the sake of unity, for the sake of that person. Okay? Again, you're giving something up to do what's best for them. All right? Am I only to number 5? Okay. Oh well. Love is a daily commitment to admit your sin, weakness, and failure, and to resist the temptation to offer an excuse or shift the blame. Own up. Own your failings. Say, you know what? You're right. I was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. That's not how I should have done it. I was wrong. Will you forgive me? Um, it's amazing how many arguments can be stopped with, you know what? I was wrong. Let's get done with this. All right. Daily commitment. Admit your sin. Love means being willing, when confronted by your spouse, to examine your heart rather than raising to your defense or shifting the focus. Something that interesting just in the last little bit kind of came up. Heather and I talked about some stuff. If they brought it up and you thought it didn't matter, obviously you're wrong because they brought it up for a reason. And so when your spouse comes to you and says, I'm concerned about this, that's like huge warning bells. Okay, stop and figure out, okay, I didn't think this was a big deal. They think it is a big deal. I've got to stop and consider what's going on. Why? Because I want to do what's best for them, not what's easiest for me. Okay? When confronted, examine your heart and instead of rising to your defense. Love is a daily commitment to grow in love so that the love you offer to your husband or wife is increasingly selfless, mature, and patient. And that's what we were saying before. To grow in love, we grow in our relationship to God. And we've talked about it. The sappy romantic side, occasionally I will just say, do you realize I love you more today than I did yesterday? And it's not a matter of I didn't love you yesterday. It's just our relationship grows every day. And every day you're learning something new. You're taking another step. You're building a relationship that's bigger and deeper. And your love should grow. Now, in order for that to grow properly, you also have to be growing in your relationship with God. Because if your relationship with God is not growing, your love for your spouse is not going to be growing the way it should. So, always growing. And we actually touched on that with the planting, pulling out weeds, building each other up lesson. All right. Love is being unwilling to do what is wrong when you have been wronged, but to look for concrete and specific ways to overcome evil with good. And here I borrowed directly from the Wednesday night forgiveness. Do real and practical good to them as part of forgiving them. Again, it's not a retaliation. Yes, maybe they truly actually wronged you. And now it's your turn to forgive them and do something good for them instead of retaliation. We've all seen that in a million different ways. Retaliation doesn't fix anything. All right. Love is being a good student of your spouse, looking for his or her physical, emotional, and spiritual needs so that in some way you can remove the burden, support him as he carries it, or encourage him along the way. And for whatever reason on that one, he didn't say his and hers, his or hers, but you get the idea. This doesn't just apply to the men, okay? We need to be studying each other, learning each other. Back to that, when you were first dating, you're like, ooh, wow, how do they do this? What do they think about that? What do they like in their coffee? Oh, they don't like coffee. Oh, maybe I shouldn't marry them. No, no, you're looking for those details and studying them, um, learning things like don't do that to the philodendron. Okay, being a good student. Love means being willing to invest the time necessary to discuss, examine, and understand the problems that you face as a couple, staying on task until the problem is removed or you have agreed upon a strategy of response. For any married couple, but especially for people who have children living in the home right now, the time investment of that is the hardest part. Setting that aside and saying, oh, okay, wait a second, there's something we need to work on, and we're going to take the time to fully understand that is okay. With my 3 kids, it's hard to find the time. I can't imagine what it takes with more than that. So, but it takes a time investment, and we have to invest that time because it's better for them. Because honestly, most of the time, it's a whole lot easier to not have an argument or not discuss and deal with something and just go out to the shop. Or, no, I'm sorry. I know you're upset. I'm just going to go mow the yard because, the grass doesn't beat me in arguments. Um, I don't lose arguments to the grass. Okay. So I'm just going to go mow the yard. I'm going to go fix the truck. I'm going to do anything other than have this discussion. And true love means sacrificing your desire to not have that discussion and having it and investing that time in that. Okay. Investing time. Love is always being willing to ask for forgiveness and always being committed to grant forgiveness when it's requested. You guys were all in the forgiveness series. I'm not going to try and redo that one. So, being willing to forgive. All right. Love is recognizing the high value of trust in a marriage and being faithful to your promises and true to your word. The faithful to your promises, I think, is one of the tougher ones for a lot of us. The classic, yeah, honey, I'll get to that. I'll fix that. Someday. We say we're going to fix it, we need to fix it. Or say, I can't fix that. We'll have to have somebody else fix it. Either fix it or admit that you can't and get somebody to do it. I think that's the harder part. Admitting you can't do it. But there's that. Anyhow, okay. Love is right. What is that? Okay. Love is speaking kindly and gently, even in moments of discouragement, refusing to attack your spouse's character or assault his or her intelligence. Something all the way back to the guy that said we were too compatible. Something in that whole series of things that they said, or maybe a book we read about the same time. Never attack the person, attack the issue. Always look for what is the issue and let's deal with the issue rather than attacking them. Because our natural instinct is if I can tear her down, then I win the argument and I don't have to fix the problem. I just make her leave me alone. That can be a normal defense mechanism for a lot of us. So never attack the person, always attack the issue. All right. Love is being unwilling to flatter, lie, manipulate, or deceive in any way in order to co-opt your spouse into giving you what you want or doing something your way. Whether it's dinner, decorating, or date night, if you do something for your spouse simply to get them to do something for you, it's not love. It's manipulation. And it's funny because through the years, marriage books I've seen, it's like they're preaching manipulation. Well, if you want your wife to do this, if you want your wife to be a better wife, you need to do this, and then she'll do that. It's like, all you're doing is trying to tell me how to manipulate my wife. That's really all you're trying to teach me. And that's not love. that's manipulation. And any marriage, and I've seen marriages built entirely on manipulation. We need to not be there. That's God didn't manipulate us. He loved us. So avoid the manipulation. Love is being unwilling to ask your spouse to be the source of your identity, meaning, and purpose, or inner self or inner well-being. Now, his statement is while refusing to be the source of his or hers. This is the one in here that I actually have issue with. Never ask your spouse to do what only God can do. Just because you're willing to be their identity doesn't mean it's okay to expect them to be your identity. Her identity should be in Christ, never me, whether I'm willing or not. So I really don't like the way he worded that one. So in my copy, did I cross it out on yours? Where's that one? 15. Nope, I didn't. On my copy, I actually lined out while refusing to be the source of his or hers. It's not, that's never okay. God is our identity. God is our safety and security, not our spouse, no matter what. All right. 16. Where are we at? Oh, we're at 56 minutes. Okay. We're going to run through these next fairly quickly and keep moving. Love is the willingness to have less free time, less sleep, and a busier schedule in order to be faithful to what God has called you to be and do as a husband and a wife. Your spouse's free time, sleep schedule has to be more important than your own, which is when a marriage works really good. It's when you're both trying to do this for each other. Then things work really good. You're more worried about their free time, their schedule, their desires than you are about yours. Then things work really good. All right. Love is a commitment to say no to selfish instincts and to do everything that is within your ability to promote real unity, functional understanding, and active love in your marriage. Back to the idea that we're all selfish, and in order for love to work, we have to deny ourselves. All right. Love is staying faithful to your commitment to treat your spouse with appreciation, respect, and grace, even when in moments when he or she doesn't seem to deserve it or is unwilling to reciprocate. There are moments, and I know you're all shocked, when I honestly really don't seem to deserve her to be gracious. And in those moments when I don't deserve it is when I need it the most, honestly. And we all have to look at our marriages and stay true to that commitment to show them grace and respect, even in the moments when truly they don't deserve it. They are actively sinning against you, and you have to show them love anyhow. It's what we're supposed to do. All right. Love is the willingness to make regular and costly sacrifices for the sake of your marriage without asking anything in return or using your sacrifices to place your spouse in your debt. Give things to your spouse. Don't sell them to your spouse, which honestly goes back to the manipulation thing. If I'm just the age old, you see it in 100 different forms on Facebook. You know, you see the guy in the kitchen washing dishes, and the wife walks in and says, "You just mopped the floor and you're washing dishes. What gun did you buy?" You know, it's that if you're doing something for me, there's obviously a reason. You're trying to, get out of trouble. So, all right. 20. Love is being unwilling to make any personal decision or choice that would harm your marriage, hurt your husband or wife, or weaken the bond of trust between you. Guys, we have to make decisions together for the benefit of our marriage. Now, I will say the final responsibility of decisions falls on the leader. One of the biggest decisions Heather and I ever made was the choice to leave the Philippines and come back to the States. And we discussed it and we talked, and I got her input, and she said, and you decide, and you tell me what the final answer is going to be. And thankfully, because I have an amazing wife, no offense to the other ladies, but anyhow, I knew that she actually meant it. I knew that whatever I said, I've prayed about it and this is what God wants. I knew she was going to work with. But I got her input first. We've got to have that. I've seen marriages where the guy went and made a major medical decision without his wife's knowledge or consent, and it was not cool. So dangerous things. In fact, okay, I'll leave that alone. All right. Love is refusing to be self-focused or demanding, but instead looking for specific ways to serve, support, and encourage, even when you're busy or tired. We all tend to spend a lot of our married lives tired. It's just how we are. And the moments when you're the most tired, you should be looking for, okay, I know they're tired too. What can I do to help them? Always looking at self-sacrifice. These are all just practical applications of how can I self-sacrifice for their benefit. Last one. Love is daily admitting to yourself, your spouse, and God that you are not able to love this way without God's protecting, providing, forgiving, rescuing, and delivering grace. I've said it before. One of the things that scares me is teenagers, young people out there shopping for a spouse and not giving serious consideration to the fact that if they don't get if a Christian young person does not marry a Christian spouse, they're just in a mess. Because that spouse is never actually going to be able to love them the way they should without God. And that's scary. And I mean, I remember as a kid, youth group was all about, you have to marry a Christian woman. You have to marry a Christian woman. And it's like, okay, man, whatever. Sure. And the more I study the marriage and the more I realize the responsibilities that are on me, I realized this would be an absolute nightmare with an unsaved wife. So, admitting to God that I can't do it without his help. She can't do it without God's help. I can't do it without God's help. We have to have God's help. Biblical sacrificial love should be the defining characteristic of all Christians, but most evident in our marriage relationships. We talk about love, marriages, it's all about love. We just have to remember which kind of love it is. Not John Lennon's kind, but John the Evangelist's kind. So, any quick questions before we wrap up? And I realize I kind of ran through those quickly, but I did print them out so you can take them home and read through them some more. Together, even. All right. I'll close the video.